Most Scary Marriage Episode 2. In this episode, tensions rise between Clara and her husband Joe over a secretive business venture. Clara reminds Joe that they sold their land and she gave him all the money she had to help him start the business based on his promise that he would eventually resign from his job and fully commit to it. However, she expresses deep frustration that, despite her sacrifices, she still knows nothing about the business, its nature, its progress, or whether it's making any profit. When she asks to see the business, Joe becomes defensive and dismissive, questioning why he should involve her just because she contributed financially. He reminds her that she is a woman, implying that gender justifies keeping her out of business matters. Clara challenges this, pointing out that she is his wife and has a right to understand their shared financial future, especially for the sake of their daughter. The conversation reveals a deep lack of trust and communication in their marriage. Joe firmly believes that a man does not have to share every detail with his wife, including information about his properties or income. He even refuses to name his next of kin, stating that it's none of Clara's business. Clara becomes emotional, expressing that she's tired of being left in the dark, living with a man she knows so little about. She assures him she's not trying to take over his business or access his finances. She only wants transparency and partnership. However, Joe remains adamant. He warns Clara that continuing to ask questions about his business will put their marriage at risk, making it clear that in his view, a successful marriage means the man makes all the decisions and the woman stays in her place. The episode ends on a chilling note, highlighting a controlling and secretive dynamic that threatens to destroy their relationship. During a seemingly quiet breakfast, Clara and her daughter Benny are seated at the table when Joe walks in and immediately becomes hostile. He greets them with anger instead of a good morning, questioning Clara with irritation. What is the meaning of this? Confused, Clara tries to understand what he's referring to, but Joe points out the crumbs of bread on the table and begins ranting about how expensive a loaf of bread has become and how hard he works to provide for the family. When Benny, trying to defend her mother, calmly asks why he's raising his voice, Joe's response is violent. He threatens to slap her for speaking to him that way. Clara quickly steps in, urging him to calm down and not talk to their daughter like that over something so trivial. Joe's anger escalates as he criticizes the quality of the breakfast and accuses Clara of doing nothing but talking back to him. He hurls insults, calling Clara stupid and extending the insult to their daughter, saying she is stupid as well because of her mother. Benny, clearly hurt and disrespected, tells her father not to insult her. Joe aggressively reminds her to stay out of adult conversations and threatens to slap her again. Clara urges Benny to stay out of it, recognizing that Joe is in a terrible mood. She tries to de-escalate the situation, but Joe turns the blame on her, accusing her of disrespecting him in front of their daughter. Frustrated and humiliated, Benny decides to leave for school, sarcastically remarking that at least no one will teach her how to eat bread there. She mocks the quality of the bread they were given for breakfast, calling it hard and dry. Joe takes offense and becomes more agitated, questioning how they could be so ungrateful after all he goes through to provide for them. He insists that neither of them understands the stress he endures to earn money and buy food, making it clear he feels unappreciated. Clara, now visibly exhausted and confused, pleads for clarity, asking what is truly wrong and why Joe is behaving this way. But instead of offering an explanation, Joe storms off, bitterly telling them to enjoy your meal. The scene ends with unresolved tension, revealing deep cracks in the family's relationship marked by verbal abuse, emotional manipulation, and a growing disconnect between Joe and his wife and daughter. Clara approaches Joe in an attempt to have an honest conversation about his recent change in behavior, particularly his constant anger, nagging, and verbal abuse over small issues like food. She gently asks what's really going on and why he's suddenly become so irritable. Joe immediately becomes defensive and dismissive, accusing Clara of having no idea what he goes through to put food on the table. He insists that she should go out there and see what people suffer, implying that she lives a life of ease and doesn't appreciate his efforts. Clara tries to de-escalate the situation, acknowledging that he is the one providing for the family and expressing sincere appreciation for all that he does. However, she firmly reminds him that being the provider doesn't give him the right to insult her or their daughter. She suggests that if he had allowed her to work and contribute financially, the burden wouldn't fall entirely on him and perhaps this tension wouldn't exist. Joe takes offense at this suggestion, accusing Clara of trying to undermine his role as a man. He claims she wants to work just so she can shame him publicly, making others think he's failing in his duties as the head of the household. Clara is stunned by this interpretation and points out the unfairness in being constantly insulted while expected to remain silent and submissive. The conversation becomes more emotional when Clara brings up how Joe recently treated their daughter, calling his behavior toward her disgusting and emotionally damaging. Joe coldly replies that she is his daughter and that he is trying to raise her well, using that as justification for his harsh treatment. Clara challenges this, asking if raising a daughter well includes yelling at and insulting her over food. She expresses deep confusion about Joe's ongoing anger, asking if he's simply tired of being the provider and whether she should step in and support herself and their daughter. Joe's response is shockingly cruel. He accuses Clara of wanting to go out and become a prostitute, suggesting that if she works in an office, she'll sleep with her boss and bring the money back home. He implies that her desire to contribute financially is rooted in immoral intentions, not partnership or love. Despite these degrading accusations, Clara remains composed and asserts her dignity. She tells Joe that he can insult her all he wants, but she will never allow him to tarnish her name or her character. She makes it clear she has boundaries and self-respect, no matter what he says. This disturbing scene highlights the toxic dynamics of their marriage, marked by verbal, emotional, and now physical abuse. Clara's attempt at open dialogue is met with hostility, deflection, and accusations, revealing the extent of Joe's insecurity, control issues, and disrespect.
As Joe prepares to leave for work, he is confronted by his landlord, who demands payment for overdue rent. Joe acknowledges that the rent is late but explains that times are hard and he's doing his best to gather the money. The landlord, unimpressed, points out that Joe works in a company and receives a salary, arguing that as a businessman himself, he understands economic hardship better. He criticizes Joe for driving a nice car while failing to pay rent and warns that if the money isn't paid by next weekend, Joe and his family will be thrown out. The conversation quickly escalates into a heated argument. Joe, feeling insulted, reminds the landlord that he's always paid his rent on time and refuses to accept threats. The landlord accuses Joe of disrespect and questions his priorities. In response, Joe becomes defiant and arrogant, boasting about his past wealth and claiming he could buy the house, the landlord, and all the properties in town if he wanted to. He accuses the landlord of acting superior just because he owns a house and tells him to compare his property to the luxurious buildings on Banana Island. The exchange turns increasingly bitter and personal. Joe orders the landlord to move out of the way so he can leave for work, while the landlord warns Joe to have both the money and the same bold attitude ready by next weekend, or face consequences. The landlord leaves with a final jab, calling Joe a jobless man and suggesting he might be spending money on another family or on women outside his marriage. This intense scene highlights themes of financial pressure, pride, and growing tension between Joe and those around him, as his public image begins to crack under the weight of debt, ego, and hidden personal struggles. Thank you for watching and don't miss the next episode.